If you've joined us already, we're going to take maybe one more minute we'll get to the top of the hour and we'll get going with everybody. But if you are here, I appreciate you joining us today. We're looking forward to this live stream, and we'll formally start here in about 60 seconds. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike McDonald, and I am the president of Kid Venture, and I'm so happy to be hosting this live stream event titled The Wellbeing of Our Kids, which is being streamed on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel, so you can actually view it from both those. We will record this as well, so if you didn't get a chance to see it, or you have a friend or family member that wants to see it too, we'll post that, and that'll be available almost immediately after we're done. I'm even happier today to be joined by two very talented and amazing professionals, Rachel Plimpton and Taylor Blunson. How are y'all doing?
Thank you.
Doing well, thank you.
Thank y'all so much for being a part of this. Now, Rachel and Taylor, full disclosure here, they are very well-respected counselors and therapists in their fields, but a very important tidbit of information. Many years ago, they were also part of the Kid Venture team. You guys missed that, by the way?
For sure.
You have anything going on this summer, by the way? Would you like to anything? No, maybe too busy to come back and be a camp director again, huh?
Yeah, maybe
Well,
a little bit.
right. It's wonderful having you guys both here, and I particularly love that unique perspective. Why don't you talk a little bit about yourself, and we'll have you guys formally introduce yourself. I'll start with Rachel.
Yes, thank you so much for having us on today. I'm excited to talk about this. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, I'm a mom of two amazing kids that actually both attended Kid Venture for many years. And I'm a licensed social worker in private practice at Cypress Counseling and Wellness. And so I work a lot with children and teens and their families just to try to help them through whatever's going on in their world.
Thanks, Rachel. Taylor.
Yeah, super happy to be here. So my name's Taylor. I'm also a mom myself. She has not attended camp. She's only a year and a half, so maybe in 2 summers we'll get her in there. Um, but I'm a therapist at Houston Feel Good Therapy. So I see a lot of kids, teens, young adults, trying to help them navigate adulting that is to come, right, and figure out what's going on in their world as well, and just kind of help them, navigate those waters.
Great. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate you being here again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've been running summer camp for 29 years. Had thousands of kids come through our program, and it's interesting. We've had a unique window or maybe perspective on kids because of that. And over the years, we've seen kids, pre-pandemic. We also saw them pre-social media, pre-mobile phone, and have sort of tracked that and watched that over the years. And one of the things that I don't know if I want to say concerned, but it's been on the forefront of my thoughts these last few years has been sort of the mental health issues that I think our kids are facing today that maybe perhaps they didn't in this kind of degree 20 years ago or so. And the goal of this is to sort of bring some professionals to the table, open up that book, and let's talk about those mental issues that I think our kids are facing. So what we're going to do in this discussion for the next hour is first set the stage and the landscape of what mental health looks like for our kids in our country. I'm going to give you a little bit of data and statistics. And then we're going to go into really two parts. The first part is to talk to Rachel and Taylor, talk to you guys about mental health, what you're seeing. What are the big issues? What are those big triggers that you think are creating this opportunity for so much anxiety and depression in our kids? What factors are contributing to that? Then we'll shift that discussion a little bit more to, as parents, what is it that we can do at home? Maybe how do we see the warning signs? How do we create an environment in the house that's going to be more conducive to our kids talking to about us? And how do we seek help if in fact our kids are struggling with anxiety or depression or some kind of addictive behavior. So that's kind of what we're going to do. Let me start out with some statistics. Now, these I sort of compiled from the National Institute of Mental Health America, Johns Hopkins Medicine, and the Center for Disease Control. But in the 10 years leading up to the pandemic, feelings of persistent sadness and hopelessness, as well as suicidal thoughts and behaviors, increased by almost 40% among young people. Mental health illness rates were significantly higher for adolescents, about 50%, and young adults, about 30%. There are currently about 4.5 million children in the United States diagnosed and living with anxiety. ADHD, behavior problems, anxiety, and depression are the most common mental disorders affecting our children. 36% of young girls reported being extremely anxious daily, and teen depression has increased 59% since 2007. And an article I read recently, and it was a research project done by the Pew Institute that was released in January of 23, found that mental health issues are the top concern for parents, with 40% saying that they are extremely or very worried that their children are struggling with anxiety or depression, 36% feeling somewhat worried. Comparatively, in 2015, that same study only found 54% of parents reported worrying at all. I mean, when I read those statistics, when I describe that, Rachel and Taylor, those things ring true for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it, a lot of anxiety and just a lot of worry in kids. And then for sure some depression. And I think just kids trying to figure out what they feel too is the other part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Taylor. Were you going to say?
Oh yeah, no, it's just I completely agree. I think majority of the kids that come in to see me and my teens are most of them are struggling with anxiety or some excessive worry, right? And immediately after the pandemic, I definitely saw an increase in kids that were in crisis, so needing more crisis counseling, having more suicidal ideation. That's kind of dipped a little bit for me, but the anxiety has still been really high.
Yeah, I think it's real easy for us to assume that the pandemic caused a lot of these issues, but the facts bear out that prior to the pandemic, right, we were seeing a huge increase in the number of diagnosed kids with anxiety, with depression. Would you say the pandemic only exacerbated that?
I think so. I mean, I think it definitely didn't add to it. I think just the pandemic added this increased worry of like, am I going to get sick or what does this mean or what
Right.
if and all the things.
Mm. On top of the social isolation, right?
Or the
Hmm.
lack thereof? Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, so let's dive into there a little bit more. Um, I guess the big question for me is, why are we seeing such a rise in mental health issues in our kids?
Taylor, do you want to start and I'll follow?
Sure. Yeah. Um, I think it's a combination of a lot of different things, right? I think for one, right, like you said, kind of since the pandemic, we have seen a lot of things increase in our kids as far as that excessive worry, what's going to happen, but removing them, during that time whenever they were isolated, not going to schools, not interacting with peers. Caused a lot of social issues too, right? A lot of kids came in for social anxiety. They didn't know how to connect to their peers again. They struggled to maintain relationships or even build relationships. That's just one factor though, right? I think part of it also is you know one, we are becoming more aware of things in our society, right? Mental health, that stigma, there's still a stigma, but it is dropping a little bit, I think, right? We're finding more resources available and things like that. So there is more of a spotlight on it, if you will.
Mhm.
But again, that's also just one factor, right? I think there's a lot of different things that kind of can play a part in it.
Yeah. Rachel, would you agree there, or are there any particular factors, Rachel, that you feel are more notable than others?
I mean, I think exactly, I agree with everything that Taylor said. The only couple of things that I would add, I think, would be sleep. I think kids are struggling with sleep just kind of overall for various reasons. Not getting enough sleep, having a hard time going to sleep due to the worry and anxiety, which only increases it, right? I think nutrition, um, as a parent, I know nutrition is very hard. My kids like the goldfish and the processed foods, and it's hard um, to move beyond that. But I think the amount of processed foods our kids eat can definitely add to the level of they're just not getting the nutrients to feed their brain and their bodies
Yeah.
effectively. Um, and then I think social media and technology are just another element. And then I think kind of ties along with COVID, this idea of like, and some other factors in our society of overemphasis on safety, right? Like not as parents kind of holding kids a little bit closer, which it to them increases, oh yeah, I can't go out by myself, right? So this overemphasis on I've got to be worried because I don't know what's going to happen, which can sometimes come from us as parents.
Yeah. It's a lot of factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot to unpack. I kind of want to let's dial into one or two of these that maybe from my personal experience come to mind a little bit more. Let's talk about social media. I know it's front and center in a lot of people's worries. A lot of parents are maybe unsure about how much social media, to what impact, to what level is social media impacting my child negatively or positively. Let's focus on that for a little bit because I think that's a real hot topic for a lot of parents, and I know it's something that is really impacting our kids positively and negatively too.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to everybody about social media. What are you seeing in your practices? How is that impacting our kids, our young kids, our older kids? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can jump in on that if you're cool with that, Rachel. But
Mm-hmm.
when a couple of clients come to mind when I think about social media, right? I have kids who don't have friends in school, right? They only have friends online. They're only connecting with people in their online world of the games that they play, the forums that they're posting on, right? Those kinds of things. Or even playing, even with my younger kids, right? Again, the games they're connecting to people only online. They struggle in real life, right? Connecting with their peers in school. They have this idea of who they want to be, and that's who they project online, and that's how they're making connections. So they're really only building connections in those outlets, right? Which is kind of scary.
Yeah,
But you don't want to take that away if that's their only connection. So it's finding the balance of, okay, I want you to connect with people in the real world too, right? Um, so I think that's part of what I'm seeing. And then the other side of it, as far as things like Snapchat or Instagram, right? That instant gratification of how am I measuring up to everybody else? How many likes am I getting on my post? Well, this person didn't comment on it. Well, that means I'm not the best or I'm not good at what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing, right? So there's a lot of pressure to be the best or be on top, gaining that from their peers.
yeah. I think you bring up a really interesting point. A lot of the parents maybe watching this today lived in a world prior to social media. That's right. So our contact with one another um, was either over a landline or
Mm-hmm.
it was face to face, right? Um, and now we have social media. Now we live in much more of a technological digital world, right? But we have this balance, right? And we have this, we had this opportunity to be in a world that didn't have a social media platform, and now we have that. But for all of our kids, for the most part now, they've never not had social
Mm-hmm.
media in their life, right? It's always been a part of their existence, right? And that strikes me as kind of scary, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Rachel, you want to add to what Taylor was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess how I present social media to parents a lot of times or families as a whole, even working with my kids, I do agree there's this level of of comparison, right? Which increases this level of perfectionism, specifically for teen girls, I see, which creates worry, right? Like if I'm not perfect, what does that mean? Like if I'm not getting the likes and people commenting, like what does that mean?
Yeah.
But I guess how I work with parents and teens on that is I don't think you want to go to the other spectrum of like, okay, we got to get rid of social media, right? I think it comes down to how do I manage the emotions and the feelings that come with technology, and also how do I manage my time, kind of like what Taylor's saying. Like, I don't want to lose all of that because there is some benefit, right? And you do build connection online, but how do I manage my time so it's not so strong one way?
Right.
And parents being able to navigate that too. Like, how do I teach my kids? Because once they turn 18 and they're out of the house, you're not there to say, okay, you can't have Snapchat, you can't have all these things. And so you want to give them the skills and the tools to be able to, beyond 18, when they're not with you, how they know how to manage it.
Right. It seems like there's no rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of all over the map. How much is enough time? How much is too much time? It's as a parent, it's almost like um, there's just no guidepost, I think, for our kids. And I think part of that is because it's new, right?
Mm-hmm. But I don't, I think every kid is different too, and their
Right.
personalities and how they respond
Hmm.
to social media. So I don't think there is a blanket, and that's what's hard for parenting and for kids, right? There's not a one size fits all on how you
True.
manage it. But I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, like how, what as parents can we do, or how do we do that?
Right.
But it's
Right.
hard for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because we're on social media too, as well, right? And we're using
Mhm.
that same platform, doing very similar things. Um, Okay, let's talk a little. Let's shift now, if you would. You brought up an interesting topic, which I don't think a lot of people really talk about. But as you were talking about it, Rachel, you were talking about nutrition. You were talking about sleep, and as you were talking about the lack of sleep and the lack of proper nutrition, it's almost like a vicious cycle, right?
Mhm.
Um, uh, and the the less sleep we get, um, the less we're eating well, the more we're putting ourselves in a position to be more prone to depression and anxiety and feelings of uneasiness. Talk to me a little bit more about sleep and nutrition and why those two topics that you brought up. Why do you feel so strongly about those right now? Because I don't think a lot of people maybe think about those. I think social media gets a lot of the attention,
Mhm.
right? Um, but where does sleep and nutrition fall in the mix when it comes to a factor for contributing to anxiety or depression?
Um, so I think with anxiety and depression or mental illness, let's start with nutrition. Um, a lot of the vitamins that we need to be able to function the most effectively um, come from non-processed foods, right? Nuts, avocados, um, fruit, vegetables, protein, like all those kind of things. And unfortunately, it's just not in processed foods as much. And so as kids, they are not getting what they need in their brains to be able to grow the pathways they need to be able to make the appropriate connections to function
Yeah,
the most effectively. Um, or even like yogurt. And I think the idea of like the mind gut connection, right? Making sure that our gut is healthy, because there is a connection between our stomach and our brains, right?
right.
And so it's just a hard road to navigate with kids, but I think an important one, because the processed foods are a lot easier. We're a very on the go society. Kids have a lot of stuff going on. Um, and those foods are usually what kids like, and easy to pick up and go. But it is important just to kind of keep in the back of your head, like, can I add maybe like some nuts or yogurt um, to kids' diet or lunch to kind of help give them the nutrients they need. Um,
When a family
and then
or a child comes in um, to your office, are these some of the questions that you're asking to try to get a baseline for what's sort of going on in their life? Is that part of that process for y'all?
it is for me. I try to get an idea of like, I think it's one of the first questions I ask kids when I work with them, like, how are you sleeping? Is it hard to fall asleep? Is it hard to stay asleep? Is it hard to wake up? Like all those things. Just to kind of get a sense. And again, it's trying to navigate how can I help them give the skills to manage that differently, right? And talking about nutrition, and I think there's a really good book out there that's called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, that gives all the nutrients that are really helpful um, in your diet. So I try to share that information with parents to just say, how can we add some of this to our life, right?
Taylor, is this something in your practice that you guys are focused on too as well, the nutrition and sleep piece?
So the sleep piece for sure. I'm not as familiar with some of the science behind the nutrition specifics. I know that mind body medicine and somatic symptoms and all of that are a huge component, right? And we definitely
Right.
see those somatic symptoms take place within our body whenever you are experiencing, whether it's depression, anxiety, other mental concerns, whatever it may be. But sleep is definitely a part of our assessment that we do when a kid or anyone really comes in to sees us. The same kind of questions that Rachel mentioned, with waking up, difficulty, are you sleeping too much, too little, all of those questions,
Right.
because it can be a huge indicator of, is something going on? How do we help manage that? And even looking at their routine of how do they wind down for the night, looking at all of those
Hmm.
factors.
Um, when I was a kid, I always have 8 hours in my head, right? That I was always told. I don't know where that comes from, but 8 hours of sleep, is that pretty much a standard for an adolescent these days that we're trying to get them to sleep, or does that vary by kid? And some kids don't need 8 hours. Some kids are fine with less, or some need more. I think my teenagers probably needed about 15 hours of sleep apparently.
Yeah, and I don't know. I wouldn't know the stuff right off the top of my head, but I do
Yeah.
know I talk to my teens a lot, because just biologically they are wired to like stay up later and sleep in. Like
Right.
that's just how their brain is wired currently. And so we kind of try to navigate that, right? To giving some balance to, yes, your body is like kind of your body is like, I want to stay up and I want to sleep in. So how do we train it
Right.
to be different?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's that internal battle, right, that they're having of
Hmm.
like, I want to stay up, but I need to go to bed.
Yeah.
Um, you brought up a topic before we were talking about nutrition and sleep, and it had to do with the schedules of kids, right? Um, One of the things that I see in my world um, seems to be, in my opinion, an overscheduling of a kid's routine, right? I mean, school is one thing, but then to go to the next endeavor and then tutoring and something else. Um, and I know that kids are resilient and kids are curious and want to do and try a lot of new things. But do you think that for a lot of parents and a lot of families, we're overscheduling our kids, and does that contribute to a greater opportunity for anxiety or even depression for that matter? And do you see that as being a factor?
I think I see it with some kids. I think I just what I see personally in my practice is it can be very child specific, because some kids do very well like having like routine and schedule and a lot of things planned. Um, and I guess the idea is if they function well, right,
Yeah.
and they don't have distress with that, or start to you start to notice like some anxiety or depression with the overscheduling, then they seem to be managing it well. Something to
Right.
be aware of, but seem to be managing well. If kids are having a lot of meltdowns and a lot of just kind of dysregulation, and they are overscheduled, or they're kind of saying like, I want to stay home, like I
Yeah.
don't want to do something.
Yeah.
It may just be worth kind of paying attention, like maybe they are overscheduled, right? I hear that from my kids at times, like if they have something every night,
Right.
sometimes they're like, "Ah, I just don't want to go."
Right.
And I somewhat listen to that, right? I balance that as a mom. Um, where I'm like, well, we've committed, but also I want to be sensitive to that overscheduling.
Right. Right. Exactly. Taylor, any comments when it comes to that with any of your kids? Do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Rachel said. Every kid is kind of different, right? Some of them really thrive on having things set like that. But I also know some of my kids, they like to be so busy because whenever they don't have anything and they sit in that downtime, that's when they feel the symptoms of their depression.
Hmm.
And that's when they
Right.
have to combat the hard emotions and they don't want to deal with it. right?
Right.
And
It's
so,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and so then it can become challenging for them to have any kind of downtime because that's when they feel it, right? And then as they grow into adults, if they don't know how to handle that, then the cycle just kind of continues.
Hmm. Um, if you have questions as we're moving along through the discussion today, feel free to put those in the comments section. We're going to clear an area towards the end of the hour to sort of address those questions you have. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the comment section. Okay, so we talked about social media being a factor for anxiety and potentially depression. We talked a little bit about nutrition, sleep. Are there any other factors you think that are notable besides those that you think are triggers for kids today? I mean, I mean, and I know I'm sort of preempting your answer to that, but from my own thing, it seems like there's a lot for a kid to worry about today. Whether that's school safety, whether that's climate, whether that's when I was a kid, I didn't even know about the news, right? Unless you had like three channels on in the house, there was really no way to be bombarded by the amount of data and information that we get on a regular basis, right? And now it's almost impossible to escape that. I think as a kid, right, it's even a young child, right? These kids know about school safety. They know about climate. They know about crime, or they know about grades. It seems like it's maybe a little more challenging to be a kid to have to deal and balance all those things. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, go ahead.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
Taylor.
No, it's okay.
No, I think it is. It's hard for kids to manage and hear all of that and know what to do with it. I think is the key, and that's what I hear a lot in sessions or when we talk through, right? It's they just don't know what to do with the information, and so it kind of just sits there in that unknown, and then there's a lot of like dysregulation or meltdowns, or and parents are like, I don't know where that came from.
Right.
And it could be just because kids are internalizing a lot and they just don't know what to do with it. And so part of my work with kids and families is learning how do I take the information and learn like I can control and what I can't control, and then you manage from there.
Right. That's great.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh no, I mean, I think I mean, I agree with that. It can be hard, and I think sometimes we forget that they are not fully developed yet. Their brains are not fully um, functioning in the way that ours are as adults, and so sometimes I think we forget that and we treat them like they are little adults, right?
Right.
But remembering that they're still learning all of these things and they're
Right.
still learning how to navigate their emotions and what do they even mean and what is this feeling and how do I handle it and all of these different aspects. They're just not there, right? And so I think sometimes that's something that slips a lot of our minds is that they are still learning and growing in that way and we
Yeah.
kind of have to give them that grace, right?
I think that's a great point you bring up, Taylor. I don't think kids are any different than they were 100 years ago. But
Mhm.
our life and our society is so much different, and in so many ways, we either consciously or unconsciously are trying to get our kids to grow up faster, right? But there's this natural maturation that has to take place with the child, right? Skipping those steps is probably not a good idea. And I think that probably manifests itself negatively in a lot of different ways. So let's use that as a segue, if you will. We've talked a little bit about the factors that are maybe contributing to the negative mental health of our kids right now. Let's turn our attention a little bit more to for parents. How do we as parents sort of recognize what's going on? Because our kid may be suffering from anxiety, may be suffering from depression, and maybe we don't even recognize it, right? Because of everything that's going on in our life and our busy schedules and running them to soccer and swim and school and everything else. How do we first recognize that there is even an issue? And what kind of atmosphere or environment do we need to create at home in order to be sensitive to those issues?
Yeah. I think, right, it can look different for every kid. Sometimes it's on different ends of the spectrum, right? So maybe you start noticing that they are sleeping too much or they're sleeping too little, they're having trouble sleeping, right? You notice significant changes in their appetite, in their behavior. They start isolating themselves from friends, right? Isolating themselves from family. They just want to stay in their room. They don't want to come down. They don't want to do anything, right? I think if it's something that you're recognizing is a difference from how they normally are, right? You're recognizing those significant changes are happening, then that's when you look at, okay, maybe something's going on.
Rachel, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think she kind of talked good about those things. I think the only thing I would add, and I think she kind of touched on this, but just the idea of like, is it interfering with their daily
Mhm.
life?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Um, and I'm also a big believer in even if you kind of suspect something, right? Or feel like something's off, maybe it is helpful to just go talk to somebody to try to navigate as a family, like what's going on. I think that what I try to really do in my work is reduce that stigma of going to ask somebody,
Right.
is what I'm going through normal,
Right.
or is there something more? Um,
Do you think it's
so
harder for a parent to seek out help for themselves or their kid?
maybe their kid.
That's a
I
good
mean, it
question.
because I think if you when you take a kid to therapy, at times the parent can feel like, oh my gosh, that means I'm not doing something right, or I don't
Right.
know how to handle my kid.
Right. Right.
Um, and what I try to communicate to families is I work alongside them. To be honest, in session, I may not say a whole lot different than you do at home. Um, but I'm objective and I'm not emotionally as connected to them, right? Um, I definitely try to build relationship and rapport with them, but it's different, right, than the same words coming from a mom or dad or a caregiver. And so I really try to remind parents that it's not us against them. Like I'm trying to work as a family to
Yeah.
create a healthy family.
Yeah. It's interesting. We see, and I'm talking about camp right now. We see more parents that will come to us now than ever before, asking for assistance or support for their kids. Right now, that might be a product of more kids are having challenges than they were 20
Mhm.
years ago. And it also could be, I'd like to think, that parents are more open to seeking help, for their kids. All
Mhm.
right. The adage, it takes a village, I think has never been more appropriate than now in 2023. And I think when parents lean on others, whether that's for camp or for counseling or whatever it is, it can only be a healthy thing for the family, right? Um, you mentioned something earlier too about tantrums. Um,
Mhm.
you know, I think a lot of adults have a difficult time expressing their emotions appropriately, and I think we just assume our kids should be able to do that readily, right? Uh,
Mhm.
Talk to me about tantrums. You know, you you know, certainly in my family we've had plenty of those, right? Are those? I mean, when is a tantrum a warning sign that something might be going, on in the background, or when it's just, a tantrum? Is it easy to tell? Is it hard to tell?
I mean, I think a tantrum is telling you something
Right.
um, that they're dysregulated and they don't know how to manage the emotion they feel.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and I think we'll get to this in a little bit. So if I'm jumping ahead, you can stop me, Mike. But
No, go right
I
ahead.
think, 10 and under, right? A lot of my work with them is going to be just like, how do I label and identify what I'm feeling so that I can manage that and the meltdowns and I don't have to melt down,
Right.
right? But I think Taylor brought it up a little bit ago that their brain is not fully developed, right? So they are very emotionally driven because their prefrontal cortex is not developed until they're like 25, which is their logical brain. Um, and so it's hard for them, especially then they get into the tantrum, like to even logically think about what they need to do. And so it just is, again, as parents, right? If we have the tools to be able to regulate, like we can help give those tools of regulation to our kids,
Mm-hmm.
right? When they
Mm-hmm.
have the meltdown. Um, I think sometimes it can be hard as parents when we don't have those regulation tools. That's sometimes where it's helpful to seek outside help because you're able to learn how to regulate both the kids and the family as a whole.
We're not being a good example to our kid who needs to be taught how to regulate, in other words, right? If we can't regulate ourselves, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. And we all become dysregulated for various reasons. It's not like any of us are perfect on the screen where we don't, nobody doesn't become dysregulated. But it is an important aspect in working with kids.
So you mentioned under 10 or so, a big part of that is just identifying what they're feeling, right? And putting a
Mhm.
label to it. How does that change when they get a little older? What's the difference there in that approach?
You know, what I see is if they're able to learn what those emotions are and identify what they are, right? Um, then they have a better understanding of what's going on, right? Or how they're feeling. I think part of what Rachel mentioned also is what we kind of work on, and we do the same, right? Is as you're learning what those emotions are, like, what are those healthy coping skills? Like, how are you learning to kind of calm down in those moments and not have a tantrum, but like, right? Kind of like, all right, get it together. Like, this is what's going on. This is how I like take deep breaths or whatever the case may be, right? To re-regulate yourself. They're learning those skills so that it's not leading to them flipping their lid later, right?
Right.
And I think those skills just kind of continue to develop over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about what is it that I can do as a parent in my home to create an environment which is more conducive to addressing potential issues like anxiety and depression? What are some things, some common sense ways that parents can, I mean, obviously coming to see a therapist or a counselor is one idea, and certainly it's appropriate at times. Um, at home, what can a parent do to help create that environment that's much more healthy for their child?
Well, one thing that was just mentioned is modeling, right? So even the simplest thing of modeling, modeling healthy coping skills, right? Modeling how you regulate and not lose, like not flip your lid, right?
Right.
Um, Modeling those types of things, as well as having that open communication and like desensitizing or destigmatizing emotions and talking about mental health and talking about what's going on, right? The more regular it is in your conversation and talking about it in your household, it doesn't seem so daunting, right? If
Sure.
something is going on with your kid, for them to talk about it. I think that's a few things, right? Rachel, I'll let you jump in and add some
Well,
more.
and can I interject there for a moment?
Hmm.
You know, my 10-year-old might be really willing to talk to me about his day and what went on in his feelings and try to talk about those. My 17-year-old daughter might not, right?
Mhm.
And it might be like pulling teeth to try to get in two words out of her mouth. Um, what's your tactic there, especially with that teenager that doesn't like to talk?
Hmm.
How does a parent create this opportunity where that teenager will open up? Because I know parents struggle with that one at that age.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think there's two pieces. I think one is making sure that when kids feel an emotion that is uncomfortable for us as well. So, like when they get angry, when they get sad, when they get um, fearful, right? Being mindful as a parent that we're not shutting that emotion down, because that's when it's going to create that barrier of, oh yeah, okay, I can't share that emotion with mom or dad because they become dysregulated, and so I've got to kind of hold that in, right?
Yeah.
um I think that's one key. And then I think with teens, even sometimes in therapy, they don't want to talk.
Right.
um they just have a hard time communicating for various reasons. And I think one is what I try to share with parents on teens is be available for when they want to talk. You may not be able to force conversation, right? You
Yeah.
can check in with them and really try to build relationship. But if they don't want to talk, it's not worth pushing it.
Yeah.
But it's like if they do start talking to you, even if it's at 10 o'clock and you're really tired and you want to go to bed, take that opportunity,
Yeah.
right? Because they'll come to you if they want to. And so it's just being mindful of like seizing the opportunity when they come to you.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's a great
A
point.
hundred
Because
percent.
yeah, I think as a parent, you almost feel desperate, right? If you know that
Hmm.
something's going on with your kid, you almost want to force the issue at times rather than just sort of
Hmm.
chill, right?
Hmm.
And not force the issue. Because we all know, especially with those of us who have older kids, right? The more we try to force ourselves to try to get them to talk, the more they want to push away, right?
Hmm.
So I think that seizing that opportunity when they do come to you and
Hmm.
recognizing when that happens is so important. That's a great
Hmm.
point. Taylor, were you going to say something too?
No, I mean, 100%. If they're not feeling it, don't force it, right? It's going to be
Hmm.
counterproductive. It's going to cause that resistance to build, and you don't want that, right? One of the other things that was just going to add is what I kind of do with some of my teens. If, right, I'm thinking of a few who maybe they have an aunt or grandma that they're closer with, and they go to them. So they have
Yeah.
identified somebody else. Maybe it isn't their parent, right? But they do have an identified, trusted adult that they can talk to about things,
Yeah.
um, and open up to in that sense.
Yeah. It's another great point, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't necessarily have to be you. It's better to be
Hmm.
somebody than nobody, right?
It's
Um,
hard not to be a parent, right? Because we want them to
Yeah.
come to us,
sure. Right.
but at least they have somebody.
Yeah. No, 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 for sure. Right. Um,
And that's even like with my own kids. I mean, they're 9 and 11. But I do open, like, if they're not comfortable talking to me about it, right, I remind them like there are other people in their world they can talk to, or they can talk to a therapist. Like, again, I try to normalize, even in my own household, like going to talk to somebody. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, you reminded me of something. Several years ago, I had a group of dads, right? That we're all friends, right, and all have kids about similar age, and we agreed uh, to in a sense take care of each other's kids, right? Just check in with them, right?
Hmm.
Um, Make it a point to seek out that kid every once in a while, how things going, right? That way, there was just more people checking in, and if I've got 5 or 6 parents checking in with my kid, just ask them, hey, how's it going, how's your day, if you ever need a chance to talk. I felt like that was real powerful, not just because everything wasn't put on me as the one of the 2 parents that had the responsibility of trying to figure out what's going on with my kid, but that they
Hmm.
had an opportunity to talk to somebody, because they might be much more willing to talk to one of my friends as they do for me on a particular subject. So
Hmm.
the other thing I was going to mention too, which in my house at least is kind of like a rule of thumb, is when we eat dinner, we all eat around a table together. And for us,
Hmm.
that's been one of those check-in moments for us. Um, Now it doesn't always happen, but it happens pretty regularly. And I've found in my house that's a good time. Nobody's got a phone, right? We're all facing each other, and it's a good chance to sort of get a litmus test for how the kids are feeling, what's going on in their life.
Hmm.
It provides them an opportunity to start to talk about something. So, anyway,
Hmm.
that seems like it's worked for us. Any other tactics or advice you want to give parents when it comes to getting your kids to open up, or at least sensing what's going on in their lives at home?
I think just being aware of what is normal and out of the norm for your kids,
Yeah.
because you know your kids the best. And so just being aware of what's going on. Again, like Taylor said, like noticing. If we're not aware, we don't notice, like if they're sleeping differently or if they're eating differently or behaving differently. And so just being mindful as a parent, like am I aware and present enough to notice the changes if
Yeah.
something is going on?
Right. It's great.
Yeah.
Um, All right. Once again, if you have any questions, please put those for Taylor, for Rachel. Please put those in the comment section, and we'll get to those. Um, in the meantime, Rachel, talk a little bit more about your practice. What kind of services do you
Mhm.
provide? How are you helping families and children? What does that look like? And so if somebody has a question, either today or another time, they'll have a better understanding of what you do.
Yeah, so again, my I work with Cypress Counseling and Wellness. So we're in the Cypress area, and we do a lot of talk therapy and using different modalities. Within that, we have about a group of 6 of us that work at that practice that range from those of us that work with kids all the way through adulthood, or working with adults with addiction. Again, we have therapists that are kind of um, privy in different things.
Right.
Within our practice, we do talk therapy as well as neurofeedback. therapy, and we also have a specific counselor who does EMDR. And so if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at Rachel, Rachel, at cypress-counseling.com.
And Taylor?
Yeah, so I am at Houston Feel Good Therapy. We are located Derry, Ashford, and I-10. So if you're familiar where like Stratford High School is, we're right in that area, Energy Corridor.
Yeah.
And so basically what I do is my specialty is working with kids, teens, and young adults. Like I kind of mentioned in the beginning, right? A lot of people come in with anxiety, depression, and then I also see some addictive behaviors as well. I'm not a registered play therapist, but I do incorporate, some play therapy techniques when I do have my kids come in. And then we have two other staff members in our office as well that, again, sees kids, teens, adults, and then we have a marriage and family therapist as well. So it's kind of nice that, if we do have a kid come in as a client and parents, need to see somebody too, we can fit them in as well, and kind of see everybody here in this hub, which is kind of nice.
That's great. And do you both provide telemedicine as well too? I mean, can people do this, through their laptop and they're unable to come in?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So in person and telehealth.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. I know one of the struggles I read recently is the lack of therapists and counselors right now. It seems to be a bit of a problem. I know a lot of people have wait lists to even get in. If you're struggling from anxiety or you're struggling with depression, getting on a 3-month wait list has got to be a pretty daunting feeling for you, especially if you've made that step to make that call. That's got to be rough for some people. You guys have openings, and is that something that you're available to get to new clients?
Yes.
Yes. After school
Mhm.
hours are challenging because everybody wants after school or after
Sure,
work
I bet,
hours.
right?
But yes, there are some openings.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, same for us as well. Usually those after school hours are the first to fill up,
Yeah.
but usually we can see same week availability or next week, typically.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Um, we have comments on there, but no questions. I don't see at this point. Um, so with that, I want to kind of wrap up. First of all, I want to thank both of you guys for being here today, Rachel and Taylor. On one side, it's great seeing you again, and I really appreciate what you're doing, both for families and children. It is a service that, without a doubt, is needed probably more now than ever. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. No doubt the challenges of mental health are great, not just for children, but for adults in our country right now. There's a lot of things that people are struggling with right now. I think when you're a parent, it's important, and you think you brought this up, Rachel, just to be mindful and intentional of what's going on in your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking a step back, taking a breath, and trying to understand what's happening in your family is probably one of the first steps to trying to, get help, right, for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I urge everybody to, if that's a need in their family, if it's not with Rachel, if it's not with Taylor, look for someone in your community to talk to. Our kids are really struggling. We see that at camp. I know that's happening now. And opportunities like this to talk about that and to create conversation around this, I think, can really only help. Do me a favor, leave your comments, please. Let us know how you feel about live streams like today. Are they helpful? Are there any other topics that you would like for us to take on and bring professionals in like Taylor and Rachel? We would love to do that. We always love to get your comments and your ideas, and we'll do our very best to try to make that happen for you. So with that, I want to thank you for being here today. Once again, this is recorded. We'll post it on both our Facebook page and our YouTube. Rachel and Taylor, thank y'all for being here today.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
for
much. It
having
was
us.
fun.
Yep. You guys take care. It's wonderful having you. And happy Mother's Day, by the way, to both of you guys this
Thank
weekend.
you.
I don't want to get away.
Thank
I
you.
told myself in the very beginning I need to remember that. Write that down in my notes. And to all our mothers out there, happy Mother's Day to y'all.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a wonderful time with you guys both, and have a great Mother's Day weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.